Good morning. I guess the most obvious place to start is by asking you, dear friends, and let's just do this really, really quickly, what do you consider to be the biggest challenge facing Jews today? Just throw it out there. Antisemitism, assimilation. Anybody else? Unity. Lack of Jewish education. Okay. So what was that? Well, that could be there's no lack of Jewish education on campuses because we've got Chabad on campus. But there is a lot of anti-Semitism. I suppose if we're going to do this, based on everything you all just said, we can sum it up as the 3 A's. Anti-Semitism, assimilation, and all the other stuff, apathy. So let's actually break it down. Let's start with the first one, anti-Semitism. Is what we're undergoing now unique? Is what we're undergoing now different? Is what we're undergoing now something other than before? I mean, let's face it. Too many times in the course of history, we've encountered evil. Each time assuming, wow, we never expected anything that bad. And each and every single time we do recover, even after these terrible things have been experienced. Because fundamental to Judaism is the acknowledgement of the reality that there's darkness in our world, that there's pain in our world, and it is our job, and indeed our God-given responsibility and ability to transform that, to make it better, to make the world the better, more godly, more holy, the place that it was always intended to be. So let me give it to you straight. Yes, there's anti-Semitism in the world. Yes, we have come to discover so much anger and animosity. Yes, we've come to learn that those who hate us do so a lot more than we realize. Yes, when Israel is in peril, so many in the world turn inexplicably against us. So what's new? To be frank, and I'm going to be very frank, the shock isn't what's happening right now. Not at all. The shock is that we've had it so good for so long. Think about that. And for context, the first real example of anti-Semitism in history is the confrontation between Esau and Jacob. Jacob is the personification of the Jewish people. His brother Esau is the personification of the omnipresent enemy always wanting to kill Jacob. And as we know how the story unfolds, Jacob and Esau suddenly meet up with Esau's murderous intent, and then all of a sudden, after so many years of separation, the Torah tells us, Vayishakehu, that as soon as Esau confronts Jacob, he goes over to him and he kisses him. Two brothers meet up after so long, regardless of the ill will. They kiss, they make up. Wonderful, beautiful. What a happily ever after story. That's how we would understand it, were it not for one anomaly. Quite uncharacteristically, there's a dot on top of each of the letters. In a Torah scroll, the words and the letters are written as they are. But in this word, Vayishakehu, and he kissed him, there is a dot on top of each one of those particular letters. And our sages actually offer 2 different explanations. One is that it was an abnormal kiss, in that Esau was really trying to bite Jacob. He didn't intend to kiss him. There was no love lost. He tried to actually bite him. God performed a miracle. Jacob's neck hardened. He wasn't able to do so. The other explanation is that it was an abnormal kiss, in that it was real and it was genuine in the moment. But that is what was so abnormal about it. Because Halacha Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai teaches us it is an established fact of nature, of law, of life, that Esau son of Yaakov. It's a cardinal law of reality that Esau hates Jacob. It's embedded in the DNA of civilization that we are always going to have our haters. So when we look around the world right now, it's not as if something's just happened. The tide has just turned. Things are going on in Israel, and that becomes a trigger point for people. It is, frankly, that Jew hatred, I'm sorry to say, it's always there. The challenge is always there. Yes, maybe for a period buried somewhere deep because society conditions us to curb our racial bent. But when opportunity lends itself, then that buried hatred resurfaces and is expressed in so many different ways, as we're seeing again today. So I repeat, the shock is not about what's going on in the world right now. The shock is the fact that we've had it so good for so long. To be sure, nobody today is going to typically declare themselves anti-Jewish. I mean, come on, that's anti-Semitic. So they find other words, but which ultimately lead to the same ends. Today, hating Jews is no longer politically correct. The Holocaust took care of that. So hating Israel is the new politically correct way to hate Jews. And that's why the same professor who shared your common room, or business colleague who worked with you, or neighbor who greeted you, are suddenly rallying and railing against Israel, even as they've never taken up any other political or humanitarian cause in their lives, because, well, it involves Jews. And my point is, this is nothing new. It's been around ever since we've been around, since, as we've demonstrated, biblical days, just in different forms and in different guises. And yes, when we encounter it, it causes fear. It causes anxiety. It generates perplexity. We perceive it as a new challenge. We see it as a 21st century challenge, but really, it's nothing new. Or to put it differently, if we see it as a new challenge, then that's precisely what generates the fear and the perplexity. But if we understand that we've been here before, then we can draw strength from the fact that we've endured the past, and thus we will thrive through the present, and we will flourish well into the future. Let me give you some perspective. What is the underlying rationale for any kind of fear? All things that we are afraid of essentially come down to the same bare bones basis for the fear. And that is simply the fear of losing control. Or putting it more precisely, the fear of losing the illusion of being in control. I'll give you an example. Think about this. What is more dangerous? Driving a car or flying in a plane? Statistically, driving in a car is significantly more dangerous than flying in a plane. Driving in the United States, about 1.27 fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Flying in the United States, 0.003 fatalities per 100 million passenger miles traveled. I know, I can't believe I bothered to look that up either. That makes flying roughly 400 times safer per mile than driving. You ever hear of someone being afraid to get into a car? I doubt it. I know quite a few people who are afraid to fly, but not driving. Why? Because in a car, you're in control. You're either that person who's at the wheel or you're otherwise a backseat driver who thinks that you're in control. In a plane, on the other hand, you are by no means in any way whatsoever in control. The pilot is locked away in some room at the front, behind some bulletproof door. You can't see him. You don't know what's happening. You're not in control. Flying is safer than driving, but we're afraid to fly, not to drive, because fear is engendered as a result of that feeling of lack of control. Which means the way to overcome fear in life is to accept and embrace the fact that we are never really in control. To be sure, we're in control of our moral choices in respect to our thought process or our speech and our actions. But insofar as everything else that goes on around us, we are not in control. And so we're afraid. But the way to conquer that fear is not to figure out how I'm going to be able to take control, or maybe defeat these things that are out of control. The way to conquer the fear is actually just to lean into it, to let go and let God. Anti-Semitism is not in our control. As I said, it is an irrational hatred embedded in the DNA of the Esavs of society. Yes, maybe to some extent I could make a difference. Perhaps to some limited extent I can take some sort of control. I could lobby government if I have that kind of influence. I could engage in debate if I have the people who care enough to want to listen. I could rely on the Douglas Murrays and the Ben Shapiros and the Alan Dershowitzes alongside the ADL and the IDF and what have you. But by and large, when the world is turned against me and the noise of malevolence is echoing ever louder and I become fearful, let go of the illusion of control. Just because something is not under our control doesn't mean that things are getting out of control. They're out of our control, but they remain eminently in His control. The going gets tough. Life doesn't go as planned. And yes, it's so easy to start questioning. And dare I say, maybe even losing hope. But there is a conductor. God is calling the shots, not us. He is the one, I'm going to say it, who's enabling all of that hate that is out there. He's enabling that hatred that is so ingrained in society. But if that's the situation that we're placed in, there's only one explanation, and that is that we have what it takes to handle it, uniquely, precisely. Not only that, but this struggle is also the very thing that will uncover strengths we didn't even know were there. Let's face it, as Jews, we are different. We are unique. The world is irritated by it. Some hate us for it. But I'm not going to let that hatred suddenly define me and become my issue that I think about first thing in the morning and last thing before I go to sleep at night. I'm going to rise above it. You know, it is said, apparently, the only bird that dares to attack an eagle is the crow. And it does so by perching itself on the eagle's back and pecking away at its neck. And despite the annoyance, the eagle doesn't waste time or energy trying to fight back. Instead, it simply opens its wings and soars ever higher into the sky, and as the altitude increases, the air becomes thinner and the crow can no longer breathe or maintain flight and eventually just falls away. And there's a very powerful life lesson in that. Rather than engaging with things that are not in our control, sometimes the best response is to rise above it. Like the eagle, we can choose not to be distracted or brought down by the hate, but rather by focusing on our own path and elevating our own selves and our own Jewish identity, we naturally leave behind those who seek to bring us down. Which brings me to the second A, assimilation. Because in the face of this challenge of anti-Semitism, just as in past challenges of the same, I say to you that there really is only one response. Try as we may, we are always going to be eminently limited in our capacity to weaken the enemy. The only alternative is to strengthen ourselves. And the way we strengthen ourselves is by enhancing our own identity. Do you know why Jews get ahead in life? You know, Bill Gates was advertising for a new chairman of Microsoft Europe. 5,000 candidates turned up. And among them is Maurice Cohen. Bill Gates thanks everybody for coming. He asks those who are unfamiliar with Java programming language to leave. And 2,000 left the room. Maurice Cohen says, I don't know this, but I have nothing to lose to stay. Gates then says, anyone who doesn't have experience of managing teams, please make their way to the exit, especially teams of 100 people or more. Another 2,000 people go. Cohen says to himself, I never managed anybody in my life, but what do I have to lose if I stay? Then Gates says to all the candidates, those who do not have outstanding academic qualifications should leave. 500 more people depart. Morris Cohen thinks, I left school at 15, but what do I have to lose if I stay? And lastly, Bill Gates asks, any candidate who does not speak Serbo-Croat should please leave. 498 people go. Morris Cohen thinks, I don't speak Serbo-Croat, but whatever, I'll stay anyway. And he finds himself in the room with but only one other candidate. Bill Gates looks to the two of them so impressed. You are the only two who know Java, who have managed teams in excess of 100 people. You clearly have high academic degrees of PhDs, and you speak Serbo-Croat. I'd like to hear you converse with one another in Serbo-Croatian. Calmly, Morris Cohen turns to the other candidate and says to him, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam. And the other guy looks back to him and says, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Why is that funny? And why does it matter? You know, Jews have been told, you're too successful. You control too much. You must be manipulating the system. But this joke, it actually flips the narrative. Morris Cohen doesn't get ahead because he's rich, doesn't get ahead because he's powerful or connected. He has, as we said, none of the qualifications. He just refuses to back down. He stays, he persists, he keeps showing up. That's not conspiracy, that's courage, that's Jewish chutzpah, that's Jewish history. Our people have been through inquisitions and expulsions and pogroms and gas chambers. Doors have been closed on us in every language, Greek, Latin, German, Polish, Russian, even Serbo-Croatian. But we stayed. And in the end, when all the other voices faded, we turned to each other. We said the one thing that no power on earth could ever take from us. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam. It's the language of faith, the language of blessing, the language of a people who never gave up. And so when they wonder, why did Jews get ahead? It's not because we rigged the system. It's because we never left the room. Summer of 2024, my wife and I had the special joy last summer of marrying off our son in Israel. And on the flight over, I get up to stretch my legs, and there's a woman standing there, are you Rabbi Shachet? And I answered her like I would do anybody else, never knowing what's about to go down. It all depends really who's asking. So she continues, and she says, I read your column every single week in the paper, and I just want you to know I disagree with pretty much all of it. All right, do you mind if I ask why? She says, I'm a secular Jew. I don't go to shul. I don't believe in anything. I don't keep anything. I don't really identify at all. And I looked to her, and I somewhat bewildered, ma'am, you know, this is an El Al flight, and we're all heading to Israel. To which she said, well, yes. Quote, after October 7th, everything's changed. And then she walked away. And I've been thinking about those words ever since. After October 7th, everything's changed. I've borne witness to so many Jews, previously seemingly utterly assimilated, suddenly coming out of the woodwork. I'm aware of numerous examples of Jews who had completely stopped identifying for years, suddenly reaching out, looking to reconnect. Like a Jewish woman in the British countryside who contacted her local Chabad rabbi, her first exchange with any rabbi in over 30 years, crying on the phone, my non-Jewish husband doesn't understand why I'm upset about what's going on. Or the college student in Liverpool, Craig, who ended his relationship with his girlfriend because she couldn't understand why he must put on tefillin every morning in solidarity with the people of Israel. When Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, writes in Tanya that at the core, every single one of us remains eminently connected. And however seemingly diminished the internal holy spark, when a Jew's identity comes under threat, those spiritual embers will emerge into a raging inferno. He was talking about that lady on that El Al flight, or the wandering Jew in the British countryside, or that student at Liverpool University, and countless others besides. In 441 BCE, the Babylonian emperor Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem and ultimately destroyed our first temple. And he identified three great young men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and he brought them to his land, and he was full of admiration for their brilliance. Under his instruction, they were to receive a royal education for 3 years, learning the ropes of the palace so that later they'd be able to occupy the highest offices in the land and help him to run his massive empire. Indeed, they rose to great prominence, but their single biggest challenge was yet to come. Nebuchadnezzar's narcissism knew no bounds. He wanted everybody to worship him. So in the valley of Duro, in the capital city of Babylon, he set up a huge golden statue made from the very gold that he looted from Jerusalem from the actual temple. And his instruction was a simple one. All Jews will be assembled in the valley, including his three Jewish protégés. Music would start up, and then everybody would drop and bow down. And anyone who didn't would be cast into the fiery furnace. And so that's what happened. The music started up. All the masses of people threw themselves down to the ground as per the royal decree. That is, everyone except Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You can imagine the outrage within the actual king, who immediately instructed that they be cast into the furnace. And cutting a detailed story short, they actually miraculously emerged unscathed. We read about this, we reference this in a lot of our penitence prayers throughout the course of the year and on Yom Kippur and the days beforehand. He who saved Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the fire should spare us, etc., etc. The Talmud elaborates a lot more on the story, but focuses our attention on a seemingly trivial detail. The verse says, and I quote, that these men were bound in their cloaks, their trousers, and their robes, and their other garments, and they were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And the Talmud asks the question, why the need for the verse in Scripture to elaborate or emphasize this benign detail? Who cares what they were actually wearing? Who cares that they were dressed in their royal aristocratic garb reserved for nobility? Why is that relevant? And to appreciate the Talmud's explanation, let me share with you another story that happened 2,400 years after that one. Rabbi Shimon Schwab, 21st century leading rabbi in Germany, was giving a sermon to his congregation in which he was explaining about the famous sin of the making of the golden calf. He explained that the calf was never really intended by the people to be an idol per se. Rather, it was more as an intermediary between the Jewish people and the Almighty. And the mistake was that Jews don't need a medium between them and God. Every person has a direct relationship with God, as so emphasized in the first of the 10 Commandments. But the word in German for intermediary is Mittler, a go-between. So speaking in German, Rabbi Schwab said something to the effect of, Jiden darfen nicht kein Mittler. Jews don't need a go-between them and God. And a troublemaking informer sitting there in the synagogue went to report to the Gestapo that in his sermon, Rabbi Schwab said, Jews don't need, not a Mittler, but Jews don't need Hitler. He deliberately confused the word with Mittler. This happened shortly after the Nazis had come to power, January 1933. The Gestapo summoned the rabbi, who in turn brought the text of the commentary with him to prove what he in fact did say and how his words were misconstrued. He's told he's going to be investigated and they'd get back to him in 2 months or so. And for 2 agonizing months, he waited till he knew he was exonerated. Eventually, he left Germany, became a very prominent rabbi in Washington Heights in New York. But here's the most compelling part of the story. Rabbi Schwab later said that for those 2 months, when he was in limbo, uncertain if the Gestapo were going to arrest him and terminate him, whenever he went to sleep at night, he went to sleep in his clothes. He didn't put on his pajamas. Why? And he explained that the Gestapo had a habit of taking accused people from their beds in the middle of the night, executing them, and then for added humiliation, they would hang their bodies in their pajamas, as they would have been taken. Rabbi Schwab said he was afraid that the Gestapo would do the same thing to him. They would arrest him in the middle of the night and hang him in his pajamas for the entire city to see what would happen the next morning. All the Jews would see their beloved spiritual leader hanging on the gallows in pajamas. The shame, the disgrace of seeing their rabbi like that, a major source of added humiliation. It would completely demoralize and erode the Jewish spirit even more. It would spell an extra victory for the Nazis, adding insult to injury. So he slept in his clothes every night for 2 months. Because if he was going to go, he was going to go out in style, with his head held high. Think about this for a moment. A person is facing doom. And what's he concerned about? Jewish pride, Jewish identity. Doing all that he can to prevent any additional demoralization of his people, his God, his faith. And where did Rabbi Schwab get his idea from? From Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They came to their deaths dressed up in their finest royal clothes. They were cast into the raging flames dressed as nobles. In the words of the Talmud, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah wanted to be cast in the flames in their royal garb so that they would not appear vanquished and defeated. They didn't want their people to lose their sense of destiny and inner fortitude. Had they turned up in their shmatas, in their simple garb, they feared Jews would return feeling that the Jewish people had been vanquished forever. And they refused to give their enemies that extra victory of feeling that they destroyed not only the Jewish body, but also the Jewish spirit. So they chose to go to their deaths dressed as noblemen, with their stature erect and their spirits soaring ever higher, to ensure that the spark of dignity would still shine brightly in the hearts of their brothers and sisters. They may be bound and they may be cast into the fire, but they would remain spiritually intact, wholesome, serene, full of majesty, nobility, and royalty. They would remain princes, even at this most depraved and agonizing moment. Their God, their faith, and their nation would not be desecrated, so that one day they'll be able to reclaim their former glory and majesty. To be clear, as I said before, we should never allow ourselves to be defined by antisemitism as a response to assimilation, securing for ourselves in a page of the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest surviving, more persecuted people in history is not the point of it all. But the principle stands, to always remember who we are and what we represent to ourselves and to the world. Which brings me to the third A, apathy. The challenge is once again formidable, albeit that it presents itself in different form. This time it's not about reacting necessarily to adversity, but rather about confronting our possible indifferences. Are we prepared, with everything going on around us, to fight for our royalty, for our divine identity, for our spiritual attire and our sacred mission in this world? You know, just the other week we marked the 9th of Av, saddest day on the Jewish calendar. A day in which we pause to reflect on the tragedies that had befallen our people, including Nebuchadnezzar destroying that first temple, the crushing weight of exile. And on this day, as you may well know, we read the book of Lamentations, known in Hebrew as Eicha. It takes its name from the first word uttered by the prophet Jeremiah as he surveyed the ruins of Jerusalem and cried out, Eicha, Yashva Badad, alas, how is it that Jerusalem sits in solitude? This word, Eicha, how or alas, actually appears, all the commentaries observe, 12 times in the whole of Tanakh, always as a cry of grief and an expression of profound lament. But I suggest to you, there is a 13th appearance, identical in spelling, but different in pronunciation and meaning. And it's at the very beginning of Genesis. And instead of the word Echa, Aleph, Yud, Chaf, He, it's pronounced Ayeka. Where are you? Those were the very words spoken by God to Adam in the Garden of Eden, after he had eaten from the forbidden tree, standing on the precipice of exile. That wasn't a geographic question. It was an existential one. Where are you? Where is your spirit? Where is your responsibility? Where is your resistance to despair? And it's the very same question echoed throughout history. It's this very same divine whisper that calls to us in moments of spiritual estrangement. Ayeka, where are you? Will you drift into apathy? Will you surrender to the numbness of exile? Because if you do, that's followed by the other 12 echas, the laments and the alas. Or will you rise to the call? Take ownership, change the trajectory of your personal and our collective destiny. Throughout the millennia, there have been those who have refused to surrender their Jewish and divine dignity. We today can and must be proud, inspired, empowered, free, uninhibited, driven to live as Jews, to share Jewish values everywhere, and with that, indeed, change the world. Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, world-renowned psychiatrist from Pittsburgh, Olav Shalom, he dressed always in serious Hasidic garb. You know, the long black coat, he had his long flowing white beard, etc., his round black hat, and once on a flight, an irritated Jew turned to him and said, "What's the matter with you? Ashanda! Why do you insist on prancing about in that medieval getup? Don't you realize how ridiculous you look? Why can't you dress like everybody else?" Dr. Twersky turned and responded in perfect English, "Is something wrong? Perhaps you're mistaking me for somebody else. I'm Amish." And the other Jew blushes. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you're Amish. I only have utmost respect for you and your people, keeping your ways, keeping your traditions." And now it was Rabbi Twersky's turn to respond in Yiddish. "Aha, oib ich wollt gewesen Amish, if I was in fact Amish, then you'd have nothing but utmost respect for me. But since I'm Jewish, then you're ashamed of me. Hopefully, one day, you'll have the same respect for your own people as that which you have for others." We live in a time when we can't afford to be fearful of our shadows. History has proven that the world respects Jews who respect themselves. In the worst of times, Jews have never lost their dignity. For 3,000 years, our ancestors never removed their Jewish clothes, regardless of the threat. We must not lose that same identity and pride, especially now. Which leaves me, with a little bit of time we have left, to address a fourth A, and that is answer. My answer to the haters out there. You know, they say we run the banks, they say we control Hollywood, they say we dominate the media, they say we have too much influence, too much power, too much pride, but they never ask how or why. So I'll tell you, we were not born into power. We were banned from owning land. So we learned to live by our minds. We were barred from trade guilds, so we became scholars and merchants and doctors and lawyers. Education wasn't a luxury, it was a lifeline. When we couldn't enter universities, we built yeshivot. When we were mocked as bookish, we turned study into survival. We made knowledge our defense. The insult became our armor. In medieval Europe, money lending was forbidden to Christians, but kings still needed loans. So they gave the job to the Jews. We didn't choose it. We were pushed into it and then hated for it. In America, we were shut out of respectable jobs, so we helped create Hollywood, to tell stories, to dream. When Ivy League schools closed their doors, we built Brandeis. When hospitals wouldn't hire us, we built Cedars-Sinai. When law firms shut us out, we opened our own. We weren't trying to dominate, we were just trying to live. We were expelled from Spain, massacred in Poland, lynched in Georgia, gassed in Germany, and still we got back up. In 1948, the world watched as nearly 1 million Jews were expelled or fled from Arab lands. Their homes and their businesses and their synagogues were seized or burned. There were no refugee camps, there were no UN agencies. There was no Red Cross that came to our rescue. There was no worldwide march and call for justice. No right of return for Jews to Baghdad and Aleppo and Tripoli. They say we're tribal, but I dare say we tried to integrate. We changed our names. We straightened our sidelocks. Even as we tried to disappear, they reminded us who we were. So we turned inward and we leaned on each other and we built our own synagogues and our own hospitals and our own charities because theirs were close to us. And when no country would take us in, we went and we rebuilt our own. Then came October the 7th. They say they hate Israel because of its policies, because of land, because of borders. But Hamas did not attack soldiers that day. They brutalized women. They mutilated babies. They burned families alive. It was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And even as we mourned, the world turned on us. College students praised the killers, as we heard before. Protesters waved swastikas. Gaz the Jews was graffitied in Berlin. Jewish students were locked in libraries. Harvard told them to hide their Stars of David. And all during that while, our hostages, including one in a room next door, were bleeding in tunnels. So no, this isn't about borders. They hated us before 1948, before a single checkpoint existed. What they really hate is our steadfastness, our strength, our determination, the chutzpah of the Jew that continues to strive and survive despite what the world throws at it. They prefer us weak, wandering, apologizing, and dependent on their pity or their permission to live. And we didn't steal the land of Israel. We simply returned to it. Jews have always lived in Jerusalem and Hebron, Tiberias for over 3,000 years. And all during that time, we prayed towards Jerusalem when the world kept telling us to forget it. We revived our language. We drained swamps. We planted forests. We took in Holocaust survivors, Russian refuseniks, and Ethiopian Jews. Israel wasn't built because of the Holocaust. It was built in spite of it. It's not a response to genocide. It's protection against the next one. Never again isn't a slogan. It's the Iron Dome. It's the F-35. It's the 18-year-old girl in olive uniform standing guard so toddlers in Sderot can sleep at night. And here's the real double standard. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the world cried out. Blue and yellow flags adorned every profile. Weapons, refugee aid, solidarity, all rightly offered. But when Hamas burnt Israeli children, we're told, de-escalate. When we defend our cities, we're called monsters. When we bury our dead, they protest our grief. They say Jews are foreigners in the Middle East. Frankly, the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan disagree. The Abraham Accords prove peace isn't just possible, it's real. Israel sends aid to Syrian earthquake victims. Arab doctors and lawmakers serve in the Knesset. We seek coexistence. They chant from the river to the sea, whilst we're always choosing life. And the point is this. History has taught us, no king, no pope, no president will save us. We don't want to dominate, we just want to live freely, proudly, unapologetically. You don't have to agree with us, you don't even have to like us. But know this, never again will you decide whether we are allowed to exist. And let me add this. Rachel Danziger, she's the daughter of former refusenik Natan Sharansky. And she wrote once how I went through a period that seemed difficult to me at the time, and I complained to my father that I was miserable. And this is what he replied. Let me tell you what helped me during difficult times in the Gulag. She said, that sentence alone just suddenly helped me because it immediately put my own issues into perspective and how easy my life actually was. But what my father said next changed my life far beyond the moment of crisis, and it resonates with me, she said, today, and even more so as stories emerge about the lives of our beloved hostages in captivity. And this is what her father said to her: the KGB always wants to break you in prison. And one of the things that break you is losing the aforementioned sense of control over your own life. And indeed, he said, you don't have much control over pretty much anything that goes on in prison. But I knew that if I felt I had no ability to influence my life, I would be far more vulnerable to the KGB's pressures. So every day I asked myself, what are the big goals I want to achieve? What could I do today, right now, to advance them? My ultimate goal was to remain faithful to my principles and not to break, not to let the KGB turn me into a tool in their war against our movement. So every day I did what I could to serve that goal. Sometimes it was something small, like exercising in the cell to maintain my strength, or eating or not eating if I was on a hunger strike, or refusing to speak to a KGB agent trying to tempt me into compromise. But that was enough, because it meant I still had control over my life. They could decide, yes, where I slept, what I wore, what I ate, but they couldn't decide who I was and what I stood for. And that, friends, I suggest to you, is the same answer to fear. That is how we rise above hatred and persecution in the current chaos in our world and with all the challenges around us. Not by pretending again that we can control everything, but by holding fiercely to the one thing we can control: our moral courage, our values, our mission, our faith, our identity. Think about the hostages. When Agam observed Shabbat, when she and her friends tried to fast on Yom Kippur, when Leary dared to intervene in the abuse of Amit Susanna, when Mia recited psalms with the other women, when the extraordinary women continued to help one another under unimaginable conditions, when Gadi clung to hope of rebuilding near Oz one day, when Daniela Loni cried at night so she wouldn't break down during the day and scare her young daughter, they achieved the impossible. They took control of their own lives. They served their principles, they served their beliefs, their goals, even as heartless enemies thought they were the ones in control. Don't get me wrong. The despicable terrorists controlled their bodies, their food, and so much more. And there will never be forgiveness for that. But these women, and I've no doubt men as well, who God willing will soon return to their families, found within themselves a space where they and no one else controlled who and what they were. A space where their own goals and their own beliefs, not those of their captors, illuminated the path. That is heroism. That is victory. And that is monumentally important example for every single one of us. Because yes, even as our struggles pale in comparison, the choice to continue orienting ourselves towards our beliefs and our goals and our identity is one that lies within our hands, all of our hands. Like we said, fear comes from the loss of control, but it's only the illusion of control that we ever had. Let go of the illusion. Let go and let God. And as long as we keep showing up, as long as we hold our heads high and we keep doing something, anything, towards our values, then we are not broken. We are not afraid. We are not defeated. We are the people who never left the room, and we're not going anywhere. So I say to you, and I end with this, as we do, in fact, each time we conclude a book of the Torah. Chazak, chazak, v'nischazek. Be strong, and we will be strong. You know, why the repetitiveness? Chazak, chazak. Apparently, when you repeat a word twice in a sentence, you can say what you want with a lot of confidence, right? Now, business is business. Rules are rules. Deal's a deal. When we go in there, as long as we know what's what and who's who, whatever happens, happens, and it is what it is. Friends, we're not just survivors of history. We are the shapers of destiny. We're not here by accident, and we're not leaving by intimidation. Ours is a legacy not of comfort but of courage, not of silence but of strength. And when the world tries to lean in to break us, we do not bend. We bless, we build, we rise. because the Jew has never waited for permission to exist. So yes, we say with immense confidence, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek, be strong, and together, may we grow stronger still in the face of whatever the challenges, for ourselves, for our people, for the world that desperately needs the light that only we know how to bring. And to that, let us say, Amen.
The Rohr Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.